Elvis Presley didn't die on stage. He didn't die in a hospital surrounded by doctors. He didn't even die in his bed. The king of rock and roll, the man who had performed for over 100 million people, who had kissed thousands of women, who had lived the most public life in entertainment history, died alone on a bathroom floor, his body discovered in a position so disturbing that the first responders would spend decades trying to forget what they saw. August 16, 1977, 2:33. Ginger Alden, his 21-year-old fiancée, found him. But here's what doesn't make sense. The bathroom door was closed, yet items were scattered as if there had been a struggle. His body was face down in a position forensic pathologists later described as inconsistent with cardiac arrest. The official cause of death, heart attack, was announced within hours, but the full autopsy report, sealed for 50 years by court order. What was in that bathroom that they didn't want the world to know? What happened in Elvis Presley's final moments that required a half-century of silence? But before we enter that bathroom and uncover what really happened, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. We're bringing you the untold stories behind music's greatest legends, the truths that have been buried for decades. Hit that subscribe button now, because what you're about to hear about Elvis's final day will change everything you thought you knew about the king's death. Graceland stood silent that Tuesday morning in Memphis, Tennessee. Elvis Aaron Presley, 42 years old, weighing approximately 350 pounds, had gone to bed just hours earlier after playing racquetball. His sleep schedule had become completely inverted. He lived at night and slept during the day, a pattern that had worsened as his health declined. Ginger Alden, his 21-year-old fiancée, woke around 2 p.m. that afternoon. She reached across the bed expecting to find Elvis beside her. Instead, empty space. The sheets were cool. He had been gone for a while. She called out his name, no answer. She called again, louder, still nothing. And that's when dread began to creep into her chest, a sensation she would later describe as knowing something was terribly wrong even before she found him. Ginger walked toward the bathroom. The door was closed but not locked. She pushed it open and immediately saw him. Elvis was lying face down on the thick red carpet, positioned between the toilet and the bathtub. He wore blue and white pajamas, but the position of his body stopped her cold. His knees were tucked slightly under him, his face turned to the side, his arms at odd angles. It wasn't the natural position of someone who had simply fallen. It was the position of someone who had collapsed in severe distress, someone who had fought against whatever was happening in those final moments. Ginger screamed. She called downstairs to Joe Esposito, Elvis's road manager. "Joe, come quick. Something's wrong with Elvis." Joe Esposito had been with Elvis since 1960. He had witnessed Elvis's transformation from the lean performer of the 1950s to the jumpsuit-wearing Vegas showman of the 1970s. He had watched helplessly as Elvis's prescription drug use spiraled out of control, as the weight piled on, as the performances became erratic. But nothing prepared him for what he saw when he burst into that bathroom. Elvis Presley was lying motionless, his skin already taking on the gray pallor of death. Joe immediately began CPR, pumping on Elvis's chest, trying desperately to find a pulse, a breath, any sign of life. But Elvis's body was already cool to the touch. His eyes were partially open, staring at nothing. Joe knew his friend was gone. But he kept trying, kept pumping, kept breathing into Elvis's mouth, kept hoping for a miracle that wouldn't come. What investigators photographed in that bathroom contradicted the official narrative. Scattered around Elvis's body were items that painted a picture of his final moments. There was a book, The Scientific Search for the Face of Jesus, lying open approximately 3 feet from his head. Elvis had been searching for spiritual answers in his final months. There were prescription pill bottles. Dr. George Nichopoulos had prescribed him thousands of pills in the months before his death. Dilaudid for pain, Quaaludes for sleep, Dexedrine for weight loss, and numerous others that created a pharmaceutical cocktail of staggering proportions. The position of Elvis's body suggested he had been sitting on the toilet when it happened. Forensic experts believe Elvis was suffering from severe constipation, a side effect of massive opiate consumption, and the strain put catastrophic pressure on his weakened heart. The autopsy revealed Elvis's colon was distended to twice its normal size, filled with impacted matter weighing 4.5 pounds. The straining caused a sudden increase in blood pressure. For someone with Elvis's compromised cardiovascular system, this could have been the trigger that stopped his heart. But the bathroom held more secrets than physical evidence. What happened in Elvis's final conscious moments? The thoughts that went through his mind. The realization that he was dying alone in the place where he had spent so many hours escaping the pressures of being the king. Those secrets died with him on that red carpet. Within hours of Elvis's death being announced to a shocked world, the official cause was declared. Cardiac arrhythmia, essentially, an irregular heartbeat that caused his heart to stop. It was a convenient explanation, one that didn't require the Presley family or the medical establishment to confront the uncomfortable truth about Elvis's prescription drug dependency. But the actual autopsy, conducted by Dr. Jerry Francisco, the Shelby County medical examiner, and Dr. Eric Muirhead, the pathologist who performed the examination, revealed a far more complex and disturbing picture of the king's final physical state. Elvis's heart was massively enlarged, weighing 520 grams compared to a normal weight of 300 to 350 grams, a condition that indicated years of strain and damage. His liver showed unmistakable signs of damage consistent with long-term medication use, the kind of scarring that doesn't happen overnight but builds slowly over years of chemical processing. And perhaps most significantly, the toxicology reports showed the presence of 14 different drugs in his system at the time of death, including codeine, at 10 times the therapeutic level, methaqualone, better known as Quaaludes, at toxic levels, and numerous other substances that, while individually might not have been immediately lethal, in combination created a pharmacological nightmare that his body simply couldn't survive. Dr. Nichopoulos would later testify during his medical board hearings that he had prescribed over 10,000 doses of amphetamines, barbiturates, narcotics, tranquilizers, sleeping pills, laxatives and hormones to Elvis in just the 8 months before his death. 10,000 doses in 8 months. That works out to more than 40 pills per day on average, an amount that staggers the imagination and raises questions about how any human body could function under such a chemical assault. The Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners would eventually suspend Dr. Nick's license in 1980, though the suspension was later lifted after appeals. He maintained until his death in 2016 that he was trying to control Elvis's drug use by being the one who prescribed the medications, claiming that if he hadn't done it, Elvis would have found other doctors who wouldn't monitor him as closely, who wouldn't care about his well-being the way Dr. Nick claimed he did. But the numbers tell a different story. They tell the story of a man who was enabled in his addiction by the very person who was supposed to protect his health, who was supposed to say no when the most famous patient in the world demanded more pills to get through another sleepless night, another painful performance, another day of being Elvis Presley. Here's where the mystery deepens into something that has fueled conspiracy theories for over 45 years. Portions of Elvis's autopsy report were sealed by court order, and remain sealed to this day. The official explanation was that the Presley family wanted to maintain some privacy, to protect certain details that were too personal, too sensitive for public consumption. But this secrecy created a vacuum that conspiracy theorists rushed to fill with speculation and theories. What was in those sealed pages? What did the doctors find that was so damaging, so controversial, that it required legal protection from public scrutiny? Some researchers believe the sealed portions contain evidence of the full extent of Elvis's drug use, documentation that would have implicated not just Dr. Nichopoulos, but potentially other physicians, possibly even pharmaceutical companies. Others suggest the sealed records contain information about sexually transmitted diseases or other health conditions that the Presley family deemed too embarrassing to reveal. And then there are those who believe something even darker, that the sealed autopsy contains evidence that Elvis's death wasn't entirely accidental, that perhaps he had taken a deliberately lethal combination of drugs, that the position of his body and the items scattered around him suggested not a heart attack during constipation, but something more intentional. The position of Elvis's body remained one of the most controversial aspects of the entire case. First responders who were in that bathroom, Paramedics Ulysses Jones and Charlie Crosby later described a scene that haunted them for the rest of their lives. Elvis was face down, yes, but the way his body had fallen, the angle of his limbs, the expression frozen on his face, all suggested extreme distress in his final moments. This wasn't peaceful. This wasn't a man who simply felt his heart flutter and gently collapsed. This was violent. This was terrifying. And this was completely alone. While Elvis lay on that bathroom floor, while paramedics raced to Baptist Memorial Hospital, while doctors tried everything to restart the king's heart, Colonel Tom Parker was already making phone calls. Parker, whose real name was Andreas Cornelis van Kuyk, an illegal immigrant from the Netherlands who had constructed an entirely false identity to become America's most powerful music manager, understood immediately that Elvis's death would either cement or destroy the Presley legacy. And that legacy was worth millions of dollars. Parker had controlled every aspect of Elvis's career for over 2 decades, taking a staggering 50% of Elvis's earnings, preventing international tours because Parker himself couldn't leave the country without risking exposure of his illegal immigration status, making decisions that prioritized profit over Elvis's well-being time and time again. Now, with Elvis dead, Parker faced his greatest challenge, controlling the narrative of how the king died. Within 24 hours of Elvis's death, Parker had already begun negotiating licensing deals for Elvis memorabilia. Within a week, he was in meetings about posthumous album releases, about how to maximize the commercial value of Elvis's death. He ensured that the official cause of death remained the sanitized cardiac arrhythmia and worked behind the scenes to minimize any discussion of prescription drugs, of addiction, of the undignified circumstances. He couldn't have the world thinking that Elvis Presley, the man who had once been the symbol of youthful rebellion, of sexual energy, of raw talent, had died as a bloated, drug-addicted shadow of himself, alone on a bathroom floor, straining on a toilet. That image would destroy the myth that Parker had spent 2 decades carefully constructing, and the myth was what made money. So Parker controlled what information was released to the press, who was allowed to speak to reporters, what the official Presley estate would say about the circumstances of Elvis's death. He was remarkably successful. For years, the general public believed that Elvis had simply suffered a heart attack, a tragic but natural end for a man who had lived life at such an intense pace. The uncomfortable truths, the prescription drug dependency that had killed him, the severe health problems caused by years of abuse, the lonely, undignified circumstances of his final moments, those were buried along with Elvis in Forest Hill Cemetery. Ginger Alden rarely spoke publicly about what she saw. The trauma of discovering Elvis's body, the screaming headlines, the scrutiny from fans who blamed her, all drove her into silence for decades. When she finally published her memoir in 2014, she described August 16th as the worst day of my life, a day when she lost not just her fiancé but her entire sense of safety in the world. She wrote about pushing open that bathroom door, about the moment of recognition when she realized what she was seeing, about the scream that came from somewhere deep inside her that she couldn't control. She wrote about the items on the bathroom floor, about Elvis's position, about the terrible certainty that washed over her the moment she saw him lying there. But even in her detailed account there were gaps, moments she either couldn't remember or chose not to share, details that remained locked in her memory like the sealed autopsy report that would haunt the case for decades. Joe Esposito carried the weight of that day until his death in 2016. He had felt Elvis's cold skin, had known his friend was already gone, had made the impossible phone calls to Vernon Presley, to Priscilla, to the Memphis Mafia members who had been Elvis's constant companions. In interviews, Joe described the bathroom scene as surreal, as something his brain couldn't fully process even while it was happening. "You think you're prepared for the worst," he told one interviewer years later, "but you're never prepared for finding someone you love like that. Never." He refused to describe the specific position of Elvis's body, refused to go into detail about exactly what he saw, saying only that some things should stay private, even after all these years. That refusal to provide complete details only added to the mystery, to the sense that there was more to the story than what the official reports contained. The paramedics, Ulysses Jones and Charlie Crosby, broke their silence in the 1990s during various documentaries about Elvis's death. What they described contradicted the peaceful death narrative that had been carefully constructed. They spoke of arriving at Graceland's gates, of being rushed through the mansion by frantic staff members, of entering that bathroom and immediately knowing they were too late. They spoke of Elvis's body being in a state of rigor mortis, of the obvious fact that he had been dead for at least an hour, maybe longer, before they arrived despite the frantic CPR attempts. They described the bathroom as a mess, with items scattered, with the sense that Elvis had been in severe distress in his final conscious moments. And they spoke of the pressure they felt afterward, the subtle and not-so-subtle suggestions that they should keep certain details private, that they should respect the Presley family's grief, that they should remember Elvis as the king, not as the man they found on that bathroom floor. Modern forensic analysis paints a likely scenario of what happened in that bathroom between 2 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. on August 16th. Elvis, unable to sleep despite massive doses of sedatives, went into the bathroom to read. He took The Scientific Search for the Face of Jesus with him, one of many religious books he'd been consuming in his search for meaning. He sat on the toilet, not necessarily to defecate initially, but because it was comfortable, because the bathroom was one of the few places where he could be alone, where he could escape the demands of being Elvis Presley. But then his body's need to eliminate became urgent. The severe constipation caused by opiates made this painful. He bore down, straining, increasing the pressure in his chest dramatically. This Valsalva maneuver caused a sudden spike in blood pressure. For Elvis, with his enlarged heart, with his compromised cardiovascular system, this spike was catastrophic. His heart began to fibrillate, the chambers quivering uselessly instead of pumping blood. Elvis felt it immediately. The crushing pain, the inability to breathe, the panic of knowing something was terribly wrong. He tried to stand, to reach for the phone, but his legs wouldn't work. The lack of oxygen was already causing his motor functions to fail. He pitched forward, off the toilet, landing face down on the red carpet. The book fell from his hands. His body convulsed briefly as his brain sent desperate signals trying to restart his heart. And then, within seconds, it was over. Elvis Aaron Presley died alone on his bathroom floor, his last conscious thought likely one of terror and confusion. The medical evidence supports this scenario. The position of his body, the items on the floor, the toxicology results, the condition of his heart and colon, all of it points to a man who died from cardiac arrhythmia triggered by physical strain while in a severely compromised medical state. But here's what makes this more than just a medical tragedy. Elvis knew he was dying. Not in that final moment, but in the months before August 16th. Friends reported he talked about death frequently, that he seemed resigned to it, that he had said things like, "I'll never make it to 43. Did he want to die? Probably not consciously. But did he do everything possible to hasten his own death through prescription drug abuse, through refusing to address his health problems? The evidence suggests yes. The sealed autopsy report and witness inconsistencies created fertile ground for conspiracy theories. The most persistent. Elvis faked his death to escape fame's pressures. Proponents point to supposed sightings, alleged photographs, inconsistencies in medical records. This theory, while popular, doesn't hold up. The medical evidence, eyewitness accounts, and hundreds who saw Elvis's body at his funeral confirm he died on August 16th. Another theory suggests Elvis's death was suicide, either intentional or through deliberate recklessness. This points to his statements about death in the weeks before, to his depression, to the possibility he took a deliberately lethal drug combination. But this doesn't match Elvis's personality or religious beliefs. He believed suicide was a sin that would prevent him from being reunited with his mother in heaven. More probable is that Elvis was engaged in passive suicide, not actively trying to kill himself but also not particularly concerned with staying alive, taking risks he knew were dangerous but telling himself he had it under control. Graceland's master bathroom was closed to the public for years. When Graceland opened as a museum in 1982, the upstairs living quarters remained off-limits, and they remain so today. Only a small number of people, primarily Priscilla Presley and family members, have been allowed into that bathroom since August 16th. For the 600,000 visitors who tour Graceland each year, the upstairs remains a mystery, a sacred space that preserves Elvis's privacy even in death. But the bathroom's legacy extends far beyond Graceland's walls. It became a symbol of the darker side of fame, a reminder that even the most successful entertainers are ultimately human, vulnerable to the same weaknesses as everyone else. The items from that bathroom have been preserved by the Presley estate, though they've never been put on public display. In 2010, rumors suggested some might be included in a traveling exhibition, but Priscilla Presley shut down those plans immediately, saying that some things are too personal, too painful to share with the world. She has maintained this position, arguing that while Elvis's music belongs to his fans and to history, his final moments deserve to remain private, protected from the voyeuristic curiosity that has surrounded his death for decades. Elvis Presley's death offers lessons beyond August 16, 1977. It's a stark reminder of prescription drug abuse dangers, how legal, doctor-prescribed medications can be as deadly as illegal drugs when misused. In 1977, prescription drug addiction wasn't well understood. Drugs like Dilaudid and Quaaludes seemed safe because they came from pharmacies, because doctors prescribed them. Elvis himself said, "I don't take drugs, I take medication." This distinction allowed his addiction to flourish unchecked for years, allowed physicians to prescribe thousands of pills without confronting what they were enabling. The other lesson is about fame's cost and the loneliness that can exist even when surrounded by people. Elvis had hundreds of employees, dozens of friends, millions of fans, but in his final moments, he was completely alone in a bathroom, dying in a way that was physically and emotionally isolated from everyone who cared about him. This paradox has been repeated in the decades since. Michael Jackson, Prince, Whitney Houston, Amy Winehouse, all died alone despite their fame. The lesson is that fame doesn't protect you from loneliness, from pain, from the need for genuine connection. If anything, fame intensifies these struggles by making it harder to know who truly cares about you as a person rather than as a celebrity.